that Matthew includes in his genealogy some women. And it's one of those things that it's meant to kind of catch our attention, that he's got these women interspersed throughout the genealogy. And then if you start going into who he has chosen to put into the genealogy, they're not the ones that you and I would normally expect that you would have in the story of Jesus' life. These women all have some history, if you will. They all have some parts of their life that make them, well, they're not really a candidate for sainthood, maybe, is the way of putting it, okay? And yet, they're in Jesus' bloodline. They're in Jesus' history. And I thought it'd be really fun to spend some time with you going through some of these people, these women. Today, we are going to hear about a woman by the name of Rahab. And to get to that, we had Tamar. I was told that I had mispronounced the name, which I probably have. I am confessing that to you. We had Tamar last week, and it says that Tamar and Perez, the father of Hezron, and Hezron was the father of Aram, and Aram was the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab was the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon was the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab. So who is Rahab? Well, the first thing I think we need to come to some clarity on is there is more than just a little bit of debate out there in the netherworld about the fact that the Rahab we have mentioned here in Matthew chapter 1 may not be the same Rahab that we are used to hearing in Judges chapter 2, and the one that I'll be talking about. There's a number of reasons for that, but let me just suffice to say that in Greek, the word for the name of Rahab is really Rahab. It's not Rahab, it's R-A-C-H-A-B, and in Greek that's kind of a rah sound, okay? So it's Rahab. And it's thought that that may be a different person. Second is, the only place that we have Rahab, the Rahab of chapter 2 of Judges, married to anybody in the Scriptures is here in chapter 1 of Matthew. Nowhere in the story that we have of the woman of Rahab in the Old Testament does it say that she was married. And yet here we hear that she is married to Salmon. Thirdly, nowhere in the story of Salmon in the Old Testament, and it's very brief, is there a relationship that connects Salmon to Rahab. All we have is that Salmon was the father of Boaz, who, we will get to in another week, with Ruth, became in the lineage of David. So we also have this connection here that says that, not only is Rahab never mentioned as being married, but the person in Matthew who he says that she married never has anywhere else in the Scripture say that they were in fact connected or married or in any way. So there's some speculation about maybe this isn't the same person. There's also stuff about if you do the numbers in the genealogies, they don't match up, and I'm not going to get into any of that. It doesn't really matter to us tonight. But we need to kind of understand that there is this sense out there that this Rahab may not be the same one. I would say the main reason that there's this debate going on is because Rahab is the kind of a person that could not possibly be in the line of Jesus. We got to make Jesus pure, don't you know? And if Jesus has a person in his background like Rahab, well, what does that have to say about the purity of Jesus' bloodline? So it may have a lot to do more with our sensitivities about the bloodline than it does about Rahab herself. That should pique your interest a little bit. Okay. The Rahab that we're used to hearing about is the one that I'm going to be talking about, comes to us from the book of Judges chapter 2. Rahab, well, the book of, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. It was Joshua chapter 2, just go back. It's in Joshua chapter 2. Joshua was the man who takes over when Moses dies. Moses led the people through the wilderness, out of Egypt, through the Red Sea, to the Mount Sinai, got the covenant with God, and then spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness. But Moses was told he was never going to be able to actually go and cross the Jordan and come into the promised land. That was something that was going to be given over to someone else, and someone else was this Joshua. So we hear about her in Joshua chapter 2. We hear in Mathew that she became the mother of a man by the name of Boaz, and that Boaz marries a woman by the name of Ruth, and that Boaz and Ruth eventually become the great-grandparents to King David. And of course, we know that Jesus was in the line and lineage of David. And so there's a connection, at least in Mathew, there's this connection there with Rahab to the lineage of David. Joshua is trying, in the beginning of his book, he is now taking over the control of Israel and bringing them into the promised land. His job is to cross the Jordan River and bring them through. But there's a problem. He isn't exactly going to be able to just walk into Canaan and say, hello, everybody, we're here, we're taking this land over from you. There's going to have to be some battles. There's going to be some fighting. There's going to be some opposition. You've got this mass of people, if you'll read Genesis and Exodus and all that, there's a huge number of people involved that are walking through the wilderness and coming into Canaan, and word is spreading that this massive group of people is coming their way, and word got out, and people are nervous and upset, and there's going to be some battles. And so Joshua decides, prior to crossing the Jordan River, that he needs to get a little information before he brings his people into fighting a battle. So what he decides to do is he decides to appoint two men, to scout ahead, to go ahead of the mass of the group of Israel that's walking, and go into a land, or in this geographic area by the name of Shittim, and especially not only search out that geographic area, but to also specifically look at the strengths of a town by the name of Jericho. Jericho was going to be the first place that the Israelites encounter, and there needed to be an assessment of how strong they were, whether or not Israel was going to be able to be successful against Jericho. So Joshua appoints these spies to go ahead and kind of scout it out and find out where the strengths are, find out if this is going to be possible. So they do. They leave. They walk, and they finally get to the town of Jericho, and they go inside Jericho, and they go to, the story says they go to the house of a woman by the name of Rahab. And there they take their time, if you will. That's where they're going to spend the night, okay? Now, the Bible isn't always as it seems. If you don't know that yet, you will know it today, and you will certainly know it next week. But sometimes there's more to the story than what we actually have in the story. The book of Joshua tells us that they go into the town, and there they go into the house of a woman by the name of Rahab, who was a prostitute. That's the phrase. The fact of the matter is, people suggest that it may not have been a house, it might have been an inn. Call it a motel, Motel 6. And that she probably owned it, okay? And so it's possible they went into Jericho and looked for the closest Motel 6, got a room, because they had to do some scouting around. And the place that they went to happened to be owned by a woman by the name of Rahab, who, by the way, happened to be a prostitute. Okay? Now, we have to ask ourselves, did they know that when they went into the house of Rahab? And if so, why did they go there? Well, if it was an inn, as some suggest, They may have literally just gone there to get a room. I mean, it may not have been a whole lot of Motel 6s around in that time. And they walked in through the gates, and here was this inn, and they said, let's go. They didn't know anything about Jericho, so they probably went in there, got himself a room, we're going to spend the night, and that was going to be it. Totally innocent, totally non-connected with anything else. They needed a room. They went to the inn. They got a room. I can see there's some doubting going on. I am corrupting you already. I love it. Okay, so that's the one idea. There was just an inn. They went, they got a room. There was nothing else involved with that. But, of course, you know and I know by now, there may be more to it than that. Because it was not unheard of at that time for inns to sometimes have rooms that were set apart for other reasons. You could go there and get a room, spend the night, and be off traveling to the next town the next day, But sometimes these inns also had an alternative purpose. And if that were the case, it would explain why the story has Rahab being identified as a prostitute. So again, the question is, why would they go there? Well, they may have gone there just to spend the night, or I'll let that hang there for a while. Okay? Or we'll let it hang out there for a bit. It's interesting that there isn't any commentary concerning the men being revolted by the idea that they may have just gotten a room in an inn where there's other employment going on. There's no commentary about it. We had the same thing last week. It's done matter-of-factly. The men go into town to get a room at the house of Rahab, who happens to be a prostitute. It was like nonchalant, pure facts, no big deal, and yet I have to suspect that for many of us, had we gotten a room in a motel that we found out was also engaging in other activities, you probably, with me, would pack up our stuff and go down the road to a different motel. But that we don't get in this story. There's no judgment, there's no commentary, which leads you to kind of wonder what was going on here. Be that as it may, they're there. And it didn't take long for the king of Jericho to find out that he had some Israelite men staying in his town. And he had already heard that Israel was on the move, and they were coming in, and he was afraid. And so he sends messengers to Rahab and tells Rahab, I want those men out of your inn, and I want them here now. So Rahab goes inside, and she finds these two guys, and she said, the king's messengers are outside. I want you to go up on the roof of my house. And up on top of the roof, you're going to find some flax bales, some bales of flax. It was harvest time, and they were probably around the roof of the house, flat roof, drying. And she said, you'll find some flax up there, and I want you to go and hide in the flax. So the guys scurry upstairs, get onto the roof, find the flax, and bury themselves inside the flax. She then runs back outside and tells the messengers of the king, you're right, they were here, but they just left. Not that long ago at all, they just left. You just missed them. But I bet that if you were to take off and go down the road, you'd be able to catch them. So the men, the messengers that the king sent, take off and go down the road looking for the two spies. When they were gone, Rahab goes back upstairs onto the roof, finds the Israelite guys, and tells them, they're gone. Now I want you to go out into the field the other direction. Go out into the forest. And I want you to stay there for 3 days until the men from the king have come back and they report back that they can't find you. Stay out in the woods for 3 days. And then after that, you can go back to your people and you can report And so they thought, that's cool, that's great. Thank you very much. He said, but there's a condition here. She said, when you get back, I want you to promise that if you come into Jericho and if you attack it, you will save me and all my family when you do battle. So the men agreed to do that. They went off into the forest. They stayed there for 3 days, and they eventually found their way back to the people of Israel, and they report. Well, Israel does attack. And we all remember the story, most of us, I suspect, remember the story of the walls of Jericho, how Israel was instructed by God to go and take trumpets. Remember that? Take trumpets, and once a day they are to blow out this trumpet, and they are to walk around the walls. Do that for 6 days. Blow the trumpet and around the walls. Round the trumpet and around the wall. And on the 6th day, he says, I want all of the trumpets to blow, and I want all the people to raise their voice and shout. So on that last day, they go around 6 times, and they blare all the trumpets, and all the people shout, and the walls, what? Come a-tumbling down. They all come tumbling down. At which point Israel goes in, sacks the city. But Joshua remembers the promise. And he saves Rahab and her family and tells them to go back into the people. We are told in the story that Rahab lived out the rest of her life with the Jews. We are told that Rahab believed. And so we have a woman from Moab, from the territory, the region of Moab, who essentially converts to Judaism and is saved by God for what she has done. In the book of James, in the New Testament, we find James referring to Rahab and saying that she was saved by her works. James was big on that, you know. You say you're saved by faith, I will by my works show you myself. That's, you know. James says that the reason that Rahab was saved was because of her works, because of what she did to protect the people of Israel from Jericho. By lowering the 2 spies out the window. We have to get into all the story, but she lowers them out the window, down the wall, and saves the men by sending them out into the forest. By her works, she was justified. Interesting, the book of Hebrews, the writer of the book of Hebrews, takes a different view. He also includes Rahab in his book. But the book of Hebrews, the preacher, the writer who wrote it, if you remember, has a long list of people who by faith, before Jesus, were made righteous. By faith, Adam. By faith, Moses. By faith, Noah. By faith, Abraham. By faith. And one of the people that he lists there by faith who was justified is Rahab. Because she had faith in another God to protect her and her family. And that faith allowed her to save the spies and allow Israel to advance into the promised land. So one says by works, one says by faith. In effect, it's both, isn't it? We are not living just by faith, and we're not living just by works, but we live by faith, we do works, and those works give glory to God. So the question I ask is the same I asked the last time and the time before that, is if God can use the likes of a Rahab, who in all intents and purposes was probably a prostitute, who for all intents and purposes probably was engaging in her craft with the 2 guys who came to visit her that night, but who, for whatever reason, by God's leading, protected them and allowed Israel to go in. Mathew says it was by her and this man by the name of Solomon who ended up becoming in the lineage of David, which led to Jesus. If God can use a person as that, surely God can use you and me. Now, next week, everybody knows the story, and yet I doubt that you do. Next week, we are going to look at another Moabite woman, a woman from the region of Moab. This individual was a widow and who went and was instructed by her mother-in-law to eventually go, and you got to plug the baby's ears here, to go and uncover a man who was sleeping on a threshing floor and lay next to him with the understanding that when he woke up, he would take her as his wife. This woman is named Ruth. We're going to be looking at Ruth next week. But thank you